Okay, I now call the June 21st, 2022 special meeting of the City Council to order. Ms. Hoffman, if you can please take roll.
Ms. Elmore, Mr. Cahill, Ms. Kyle,
Here.
Mr. Skidmore, Mr. Hermes,
Here.
Mr. Doan,
Present.
Mr. Meyer,
Present.
Ms. Skidmore, Ms. Nicely,
Present.
Mr. Nipper,
Here.
Ms. Reckers, Ms. Jasper Lucas.
Here.
Thank you so much. First item on the agenda is legislation. Mr. Gatlin.
Hi, Mayor. I don't think I've ever been told I wasn't loud enough, but I appreciate that, Mr. Hermes. An ordinance of the City of Erlanger in Kenton County, Kentucky, adopting a budget for the City of Erlanger for the fiscal year beginning on July 1, 2022, and providing that no money shall be expended by or on behalf of the City of Erlanger except in accordance with that adopted budget. This is a second reading. Attached is the combined operating budget. There are two small changes since the first reading. It is my opinion that these are non-substantive based on the small dollar amount in relation to our overall budget, and we will allow Kara to explain why we had these changes, because she can do it far better than me.
Okay, good evening. So we have, for the budget, we have a change, and it was based on the incentive pay. And this was brought to my attention from the fire department. For fire and police, each officer and firefighter received $4,000 for the incentive, and that is through the state of Kentucky. So the money comes in, and then we pay it out, and it's an expense. So this year, it was increased to $4,300 based on the state of Kentucky's budget. So $39,000 was increased in intergovernmental revenues, and then for police and fire, it was updated based on the incentive. Fire, the total increase was for police and fire was $73,000, and fire was a little bit more because I failed to update the incentive based on when we increased our overtime. So for this year, for overtime, it went from 190 to 247, and that incentive is calculated in that, or outside of that. So therefore, the net total increase with the revenues over expenditures, it's going to be an additional $33,408. So on my budget attachment, Jack did point out that I marked through everything, and I wasn't supposed to.
Yeah, so the only things that should be marked through is intergovernmental changed from $3,557,701 to $3,617,343. Police changed from $7,123,751 to $7,143,771. Fire changed from $5,495,064 to $5,548,093, and that resulted in a change of excess revenue. It was $305,404. It is now $271,997, and obviously then that would change the fund balance ending, which was $11,521,035, and it is now $11,487,628.
Any questions for me? Thank you.
Okay, do I entertain a motion that we adopt this ordinance as read? Mr. Hermes, Mrs. Kyle, any discussion? Mr. Meyer?
Yes, Mayor, I want to move to amend the capital asset fund by reducing or eliminating the vehicle 75 and 79. I think these were two items that we had at one point talked that would likely be removed from the budget anyway. So reducing the $8,389,798 by $94,400 is my motion. Yeah, it was the capital fund, capital asset fund under the fire EMS, Vehicle 75 had a cost of $47,200 and Vehicle 79, striking those two items from the expenses for this fiscal year.
Okay, so we have an amendment on the floor to the budget. A motion. Okay, there's a motion. Do I have a second? Mr. Cahill? Okay, now any discussion, Ms. Lucas?
I just wanted to ask, those were, I remember us talking about vehicles that were possibly going to be removed anyway. Remind me what the reason was, because it's been at least a month since we talked about it.
Yeah.
So just refresh my memory on that.
Yeah, if I recall, these two vehicles were just replacements as part of what had typically been the capital fund, or, the capital updates to vehicles. However, I think, just kind of given where expenses were, difficulty in getting vehicles, and the fact that they don't all need to be take-home, that would still leave us, I think, with multiple vehicles in the fleet for administrative purposes.
Okay. We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, let's do a roll call vote.
On the motion to remove, correct?
Correct. On the motion to remove.
Vehicle 75 and Vehicle 79.
Yep. Roll call, please.
Ms. Skidmore,
Yes to remove.
Ms. Kyle,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Jasper Lucas,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Nipper,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Doan,
Aye.
Ms. Nicely,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Skidmore,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cahill.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, amendment passes. So now do we have any other discussion on,
Yeah, I had one more. I want to make another motion, Mayor, to two parts to the Park Improvement Fund. The first would be to reduce it from $580,000 to $80,000. And then the second portion would be to line item out $400,000 for Rainbow Park and $100,000 for Silver Lake Park.
So, Mr. Meyer, I think we've moved to I think we've now moved into the world of substantive. That's fine if we want to do that. Just understand if that motion were to pass, we would now treat this as a new first reading, and then we would need to schedule a meeting for a new second meeting. And there's no bright line rule on this, but it's just sort of the smell test, and when we're now up to a $500,000 amendment, to me, that's just something that we need to dot our i's and cross our t's and treat as a first reading.
Yeah, but just a reduction in $80,000 though. But
I understand that, but I think
okay.
we're starting to move into more of a substantive.
Okay.
I haven't done the math on it, but I'm going to guess that $500,000 we're now into 2.5%. I think that's starting to probably be in the range of where we would need to just treat this as a first reading. Not that it matters. We could schedule another special meeting and do it before Monday, I guess, Tuesday, whenever the first falls.
My motion was to remove $80,000, which was the cost of the potential additional park plan.
80? I thought it was like 500,000.
Well, I was splitting out the other items, because right now that 580 was.
Okay, so maybe I'm confused by your motion. I apologize.
Yeah, I actually had two parts to it. One was to reduce the total spend by 80,000,
By what number?
by 80.
So
from
which-
580,000 in the park improvement fund to 500,000.
Okay.
But then actually detailing that 500,000 into 400 for Rainbow Park and 100 for Silver Lake Park. So just an $80,000 reduction spend. The supporting documents detailed those pieces out, and that was what Mr. Glenn had given us as the potential costs for Rainbow and Silver Lake.
I'm fine with that being non-substantive.
My only argument for line iteming it out is then we're going to come back to you if something is not exactly like, you know, like what you are detailing.
Yeah, and no, and that's exactly what I'm hoping to happen, so that we don't end up with a $200,000 park plan or spending more than we had originally, you know, talked about in advance of this meeting.
But if you're changing it to 500,000, we're still, you know, only allowed to spend 500,000.
Correct. We're only spending 500, but we restricted to the amounts to which we were presented to each of those individual parks. Because I think we said, you know, a total of $400,000 for Rainbow Parks. That was the Phase 1 and Phase 2 design and the Phase 1 improvements. And then the Silver Lake Phase 2, that was the playground improvements and the new sidewalk site amenities at 65 and 35. So I wasn't necessarily even going to that smaller amount, but just giving that total amount for each of the parks so that there's a little bit more transparency to our residents on precisely what they're seeing that money being spent on.
Okay, so I think we have a motion, and I apologize, I interrupted in the middle of the motion. I didn't hear it properly. I think it's however you want to do the motion. How do you want to do the motion? All is one, is you want to just first do a motion to reduce?
I'll amend the motion. The first motion is a motion to reduce the park improvement fund expenses from $580,000 to $500,000.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor to amend. Do I have a second? Ms. Skidmore? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Skidmore? Did you say yes? Yes. Ms. Elmore? Oh, I'm sorry, she's not here. Mr. Meyer?
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Nicely?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Doan?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Nipper?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Jasper Lucas?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Kyle?
No, ma'am.
Ms. Skidmore?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cahill?
No, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes?
Yes, ma'am.
Amendment fails. Gary, do you want to do your other one?
Yeah, I would still like to make a motion to itemize the city parks park improvement fund items to be from $580,000 as one line item to $400,000 for Rainbow Park, $100,000 for Silver Lake Park, and $80,000 for the new Erlanger Road master plan, park master plan, sorry.
Okay, we have an amendment on the floor with a motion. We have a second. Ms. Jasper Lucas. Any other discussion? Ms. Kyle?
Could you refresh my memory? What were the original numbers that were turning around, please?
Yeah, I think the numbers that I had on my notes for Mr. Glenn were the Rainbow Park was in the Phase 1 and Phase 2 design, and the Phase 1 improvements were $80,000 and $320,000 for a total of $400,000. And then the Silver Lake Park Phase 2, which were playground improvements and new sidewalks / site amenities at estimated costs of $65,000 and $35,000 for a total cost of $100,000.
Mr. Cahill?
So my understanding is, the discussion you had earlier, if we do line item these, then they have to come back for additional funds, but if they come under that amount, we're fine.
That's correct. They just can't spend more than that on each of those items.
All right, thank you.
Any other discussion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Ms. Kyle,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Jasper Lucas,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Nipper,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Doan,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Nicely,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Meyer,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Skidmore,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Cahill,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Skidmore.
Amendment approved. All right. So,
Mayor, I was going to make a motion to table the second ordinance, the amended pay plan. That was the first reading this evening.
we're not ready
We
for
haven't
that
passed the
yet.
first budget
Oh,
yet.
okay.
Yep,
I'm
we haven't
sorry.
gotten there yet.
I thought I was counting the last votes as they had the vote from there. I apologize.
Okay, so we have a first and a second. Is there any other discussion on the passing of the, look, we've already amended the budget.
No, we haven't. We haven't passed the budget yet, Mayor.
I'm joking. Joking. All right. All right, we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, roll call vote.
Mr. Cahill,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Skidmore. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Kyle,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Jasper Lucas,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Nipper,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Doan,
Yes, ma'am.
Ms. Nicely,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Meyer,
No, ma'am.
Mr. Skidmore,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Hermes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, motion carried. Mr. Meyer, do you have a question?
I'm going to move to table item number 2, the ordinance for the amended pay plan, which is a first reading, being as we haven't had any discussion around the changes that we're including in there.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? Ms. Jasper Lucas. Any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. It's been deleted. All right. Mr. Meyer.
Mayor, I want to make a motion to move from the regular session into executive session pursuant to KRS 61810, paragraph 1, section F, to discuss the appointment, discipline, or dismissal of an employee.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do I have a second? Ms. Nicely. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Motion carried. We are back in. Okay, the last piece of legislation.
All right, we have a resolution of the City of Erlanger, Kentucky, authorizing the mayor to enter into an interlocal agreement with Planning and Development Services of Kenton County for the provisions of zoning code administration and building code administration services. This would shift I'll just read it here. Now therefore it be resolved, the City Council approves an executive order by the mayor suspending the city's zoning administration as well as expanded building code administration, suspends the associated fee schedule in lieu of the fee structure established by PDS, and approves the attached interlocal agreement as well as the service level cost sharing agreement for a unified one-stop shop. And we do have the grand poobah of PDS in our presence if anyone has any questions. You want to just briefly kind of talk about what's going on here? Just, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but you're sat here, so we might as well. I mean, just sort of give us a brief summary of the services that PDS can now provide and kind of timing and what.
I swear I can follow directions if I see it. Happy to do that. We are Planning and Development Services of Kenton County, so we provide a wide variety of services to all of the 20 cities in Kenton County. We do building services, we provide subdivision infrastructure services, we do planning, which is one of our most important components, and then we provide zoning administration, we do code enforcement, again, all for the cities in Kent County. And we also provide GIS services, which is mapping and all of the information that comes with that, with those services. So we are equipped to provide these services to the city of Erlanger. Just for your comfort, we do provide these services to our larger jurisdictions. We also provide these to our medium and small size cities, and we try to cater these services to the jurisdictions because our communities, I think we all know, are unique, have some unique approaches and challenges, and so we do try to cater our services to those to that uniqueness. So besides that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you all may have.
I just want to say thank you for being here, and thank you for all your help within the last couple of days.
We're happy to help, Mayor.
So this is a resolution, requires a motion.
I move we adopt the resolution as read.
Mr. Hermes, any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, motion carried. Okay. That completes our legislation. Do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Kyle? Ms. Nicely? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carried. All right, we'll go ahead and open up our City Council caucus meeting. Just for your information, Emmy is at home not feeling great. So we are going to postpone the discussion on number 4. She's asking that we move it to the July, the regular meeting within new business, if that's acceptable to you all, so that we're not waiting till caucus.
Is there a problem with us waiting? I mean, I think these were explained as just what she explained as housekeeping. I do disagree with that statement, but if we don't have anything pressing.
I think there was one other that was a little more critical, and maybe we can pull that out. If you want, I'm trying to remember what the other one was. Maybe we can just bump that one.
Yeah,
Right, do you
and I guess
remember?
unfortunately,
I mean, I think the one that was critical, we've already passed the resolution on.
We did, but there
which
was
for
one
the
other
open
that
air.
was an issue.
Yeah, so I think the other one that might be somewhat urgent is changing the mixed use over in the, I'd call it the mixed-use district, the old Commonwealth Station area, where the current zone, so if you look at number 3, I think that's one that we have a current property owner that's wanting to do something. So if you look at number 3, it's allowing greater flexibility within the mixed-use district by removing the requirement for multiple uses on one parcel or building. The request is to allow the redevelopment of a single-use building on a single parcel where one currently exists. The definition of mixed use will also be adjusted to avoid a conflict in land use. So I think the current Z21 would be that the individual buildings would have to have mixed use. I think the request of Emmy is to do a text amendment that if you look at the entire region of mixed use, you would have a parcel that potentially would be commercial, a potential parcel that's residential, and not have that within.
Do we have the ability to bring up the existing language then if we're going to go forward with that one? Only because
well, I think Ms. Randall wants to bring that issue up at the council meeting.
Yeah, the July.
Okay.
And then the only other one that she
Could we
wants
make a request for Andy Videkovich to attend that meeting as well? He was the one that actually has all the notes and all of the details and all of the discussions. Because we had extensive discussion on what that meant for this. So I know sometimes these things are interpretation, and I would just at least like to have that background here.
Yeah, I'll
Unfortunately,
reach
Charm
out to
left already,
Andy.
so.
I know, Charm's gone. We can reach out to Andy and see if he can attend our meeting. The only other one that Ms. Randall has kind of expressed, like, maybe put this on your radar, Gary. It's the one that's regarding trailers, temporary trailers, construction trailers.
Yeah, and I know that was one that we probably had an hour of discussion about.
Okay.
And arrived at the language that we ended up with.
Okay. There is a situation that has come up that is not, there's a situation that creates an issue. So we can talk about that at some other time. But those are the two that are more pressing than I'd say the rest of them that she would label as housekeeping, if that makes sense. But I'm sure she's watching and thinking I'm completely, I should have just.
Okay.
I mean, are you cool with that?
No, I mean, I prefer to have those discussions at a caucus meeting, but if that's when we want to dive down into the nitty-gritty and spend a lot of time talking about it, then let's go.
Okay.
I mean, so that'll be the July 5th meeting following the 4th holiday.
Yes.
I don't know about that, is it?
Yeah, it is.
Oh, okay. That's fine. I will not be here that meeting. I'll be on vacation. So that sounds like a meeting that's okay for me to.
All right. Too much fun.
So you're saying I don't have an attorney to argue against me?
Oh, no.
Love it.
There'll be someone from my office here, but I don't know if they would have the usual banter that you and I have had for the years, okay?
Mr. Hermes.
So, Mayor, we are, for the most part, pushing the number 4
Yes.
to the regular meeting.
Yeah.
And then I see that Mrs. Randall's name is after the number 5 and 6, too. Are we still going to discuss those this evening?
Mr. Gatlin is prepared to
Okay,
discuss these
Great,
two.
thank you.
Okay. All right. So number 1, nuisance ordinance. Mr. Gatlin.
Yeah, and this is one I did not realize when I put this on that Kyle was not going to be here tonight. I don't think this is an urgent issue unless, no. Yeah, so just to give it some flavor, and probably what's going to happen is I'll work with the police department in assembling a draft ordinance for the next caucus meeting that we can discuss, but just to give you all kind of an idea, there's been a concern that the police department has been to the same geographic locations, the same parcels of real estate multiple times and we don't really have any tool in our nuisance code to cite that property owner for nuisance violations. So that's just something that we're going to work through and kind of build some language and a proposed amendment to our nuisance code that would allow, again, just another tool to be used to cite property owners for nuisance violations, where we just, again, have frequent flyers. You know, it's not exactly like what we discussed under rental housing, but it's because we don't necessarily want to target just rental housing. Some of it's owner-occupied as well, but the concept being is if you have 20 police calls to the same parcel of real estate, whether that be commercial or residential, there should be some ability that we can start looking at some other options. So we will have a proposed ordinance at the next caucus meeting on that. Yeah.
So is it that property that's calling the police, or is it another parcel that's calling on someone else?
I mean, I would defer that to the police department, but it's probably all of the above would be my guess. Is that fair? Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they want to talk about this at all. So we'll wait till Chief. We're still looking into it, frankly. Yeah. But it's on the radar. It's just something that I think we're going to have to address as a city. That's all I have. Yeah.
And we won't get into much discussion, but I just wanted to ask too, just for consideration when you're going over things, if it is a rental property and the property owner is not aware of all the calls, gently consider how you would let the property owner know that that's been a trouble spot if they didn't know. I just wanted to bring that up while you're considering.
Well, and your point's well taken, because frankly, with one of the commercial properties in particular that the city has had tremendous problems with, we worked in concert with the property owner to help work on the issue. And it was kind of a two-way street. The property owner wanted to evict the tenant, and the city wanted the tenant out of there. And this was a commercial tenant, and we worked in tandem. So I think in many cases, the property owners are actually allies to the city. So 110% agree. This is not something where we're intending that, hey, police have been called at your property 10 times, we're now going to put a lien against your property. That's not the goal of it. The goal is to remedy the situation.
Can I just request that we have data when we discuss it?
Absolutely.
And I only bring that up, and I'm not pointing fingers at anyone, but I know in the last council meeting there was a lot of discussion about data related to Cherry Hill, and there was different numbers flying around and different sources, and I think it would just be helpful to us to make sure that we're going on the correct data. So if we're going to be talking about police calls and things like that, my questions are going to be, how many police calls are there? And if there's 20 to this one and there's 20 to this one, are we only targeting one? I mean, that's the kind of information that...
No, absolutely. And
just to make sure that we're not picking certain properties where there's others that may be a problem as well. I just want to make sure that we're all working from the same set of information.
Absolutely.
That's my only request.
And I think that's part of the data that they're compiling.
All right. Next item on the list is Cherry Hill Subdivision truck fines. Mr. Hermes?
Yes, Mayor, thank you. This came up a little bit at the last meeting, and the discussion being the Erlanger Road, or I guess it's now Sycamore Tree? Yeah, thank you. And trucks turning onto the road. We've gone to extensive measures to try to keep people off of it. I mentioned this a little bit in the last meeting. Independence had some luck with one of their bridges, trying to keep trucks off the bridges by increasing the fines to the bridge, or to anybody that violated, and but also keeping an officer on duty sitting there and catching anybody that came by, for over a month. I guess I wanted to run it by council to see if there was an appetite to try to fine the trucks that we catch there more. However, Chief Rader has made it clear that they would not be able to devote a patrolman to enforce that full-time. Erlanger's a different city to patrol than Independence is. So if anybody's got any input on that, I'd welcome it. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to speak for a little bit. I just wondered, I mean, like when we come into the city building, we have a badge. It lets us in. And this may sound like it's like just way far out, but why couldn't some of the people that, I mean, there's a lot of people that evidently use Sycamore Tree because we've had people in here for the last several meetings that are concerned with this. So if you give the residents a badge and you narrow the entrance to the old Erlanger Road to get up Sycamore Tree, you narrow that, you give the residents their badge that they can scan, then if you don't have a badge, you can't get in that part. So I don't know if that would be feasible or if it's even attainable, but it sounded like a good idea. And you could even do that on the Boone County end, because you got to do it on both ends, because if they can't get in on the one end, they go to the other end, or they're coming in from out by the airport and trying to come through. So I don't know. That's just my suggestion.
You're saying make it a gated community?
Call it what you want. I mean, if you got a badge, I mean, we have to have a badge to get in here. I had to have a badge when I worked at the post office, so, it's the way it is.
Do you know how many other streets would like to?
No, I'm just saying, the one that's concerned down there.
Opening a can of worms.
No, I don't think it's a can of worms. I think it's a solution for the people that actually use that and utilize it to get to their houses. Yeah. Everybody in Cherry Hill doesn't come down Old Erlanger Road to get up to Sycamore Tree.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just an idea.
Yeah.
I mean, if I didn't say it out.
Yeah. Okay. Ms. Jasper Lucas?
Thank you. A couple of questions and suggestions maybe. I know, and I don't think we have any of these in Erlanger, but license plate cameras. I know that toll booths use them to get you when you don't pay your toll. I have absolutely no idea how much they cost. But I would think with a license plate camera, you could distinguish between a semi and a private passenger vehicle. Like I said, I have no idea how much they cost, but that might be worth looking into if we aren't able to put an officer there as an alternative option, because that would allow us to fine more, which we hope is a deterrent. I'm very open to increasing the fine to as much as legally is allowed. I don't know how much is legally allowed, but do you know, Mr. Hermes, what we're allowed to charge?
I've heard 200 and 500. Mr. Gatlin, do you know exactly?
Yeah, I think we can go up to 500.
My only other suggestion, and I think I might have said this a couple meetings ago, and I've heard some residents mention it as well, that where you turn, and again, this is more of an expense to the city, but to put some overhanging signage that tells the height that can go through there, because I know a lot of truckers have said, if it's going to damage my truck, it's going to deter me from going under it. Now, we don't always see that at the railroad bridge because we've seen trucks drive under that don't fit. So it's not 100%, foolproof, but I just wonder if some flashing lights and signage above there, I would like to look at the cost of the license plate camera and the overhanging signage, basically saying, go straight, don't turn. So that's it.
Okay. I don't know who.
Go ahead.
Ms. Nicely?
We've had a lot of great ideas from council tonight. The only thing, Ms. Skidmore, I would be worried about yours is the time for the police and fire to get back there if they had to stop and get a badge and open a gate and get in. That would be my only concern of time and seconds being lost. And they can probably say, would it matter or not matter if that was the situation? I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't do their professions, so I don't know if it's something maybe the fire or police would want to give a little input if that would increase the time, obviously, of getting to a call.
I was talking about when you roll your window down, you scan your badge, the gate goes up, and you go through. I'm not talking about a 30-second delay. I'm not talking about anything like that. I would never want to cause a delay, but if you've got, yes, the residents would get theirs. The fire department would, I would think they would have one just stuck in the truck, so that whoever happened to be on duty that night and jumped in the truck to drive would have that, because that's where they're going to pull up to scan it and move on, you know? Or give them one that's longer range, that you can be 20 feet away and scan it and it's up when you get there. I don't know all about the electronics. I don't know all about this tech-savvy stuff. But
Mayor, thank you, Mayor. I guess on the fines, I think I would generally just not agree with them, especially if we're not going to enforce them. And I think it's, and I don't necessarily know that, having an officer sit there and waiting to ticket people either is, is the best use of resources. So I don't necessarily know that I would be on board, with those truck fines. I'm intrigued by the toll road idea with toll cameras. If we just changed it into an entire toll road.
I'm not saying make it a toll road.
Well, I know,
I'm
but
saying use the technology.
I didn't think we were permitted any longer to use an unattended camera to issue citations, but I'll leave that up to the attorneys. I thought there was a Supreme Court case about that several years ago with Kentucky law as well. Okay.
You asked me a question about cameras. I don't know the answer to that question. I know that I have driven under them. Mr. Nipper might know this. The bridge in Louisville, is that tolled through cameras? I just went through about $500 worth of tolls in Chicago by camera.
Yeah, not necessarily toll cameras, but cameras used to issue citations.
Well, that's a different issue. I agree with you. The case out of Ohio made that illegal. Agree with you. That was done in a suburb of Cincinnati about 5 to 10 years ago, and the Supreme Court said that was an unreasonable search and seizure. I agree with you there. Sorry. I don't know why I was thinking tolls. Why did I think we're going to start tolling Erlanger Road is what I was thinking. I'm sorry.
Could we just toll trucks?
I just said I was intrigued at that comment.
I thought that's what I heard. I'm sorry.
We'll just toll trucks. $1,000 toll.
Again, as someone who was
With a
just in
camera.
Chicago, it's like $50 for trucks and some of the tolls there. It's crazy. It's crazy. So I'm sorry. My mind was also. I apologize.
That's all right. You're good now. I'm good now. It's 8:12. You're good now.
Yes, I think we've got it all figured out now. We're going to enforce every one of these. We can make some legislation for that for the next meeting. I'm just kidding. It sounds like we have a lot more discussion to be had here. There's a lot of ideas and options out there, and maybe the answer is nothing, but I think as we've talked over the last year or so and heard from the residents, we still need to do something. We just need to figure out what it is.
Okay. Mr. Hermes.
All right, another one. Drop another bomb here. So this, wanted to talk about the temporary signage, primarily involving election, candidacy signs, yard signs. This seems to come up every election cycle. We have laws in place that prohibit the number of signs that people can have in their yard, the size of the signs, how long the signs can be up, where the signs are located. The issue we have is that a lot of that is not enforceable. It's not that we don't have the staff to be able to enforce it, or that it's not clear that people may be breaking the law, or I should say breaking the zoning rules, but that the time frames that are involved typically outlast the election cycle. You know, so someone could conceivably put a very large banner up in their yard, and you know, we can't go onto their property to take it down. We have to give them notice that they are breaking the law, and they've got time to correct it. And a lot of times, if a candidate wants to, they can, you know, just make it so that the election happens before that expiration of time, or I should say, before a fine can kick in for that property owner. So this comes up, I think, every 2 years we talk about this, and people get really heated about the idea that there are people that may have a sign that's larger than normal, or they have 10 signs in their yard instead of 4 or 6. And we get accused of not doing anything about it. I'm not saying we as council members, we as a city get accused of that. And it puts our staff in a very precarious situation. And, you know, my initial thought was, well, let's change those restrictions. Let's try to find restrictions that we can live with that would allow some of these signs to go in place where not so many people are breaking the law. So right now, we do have a little bit of a, I don't know, I think it's confusing in our zoning ordinance. We've got a section 11.05 regarding temporary signs that addresses these yard signs. We've also got the next section is called 11.06, signs allowed without a permit. And we've got different standards for those, and you know, they could be misread. One says that a sign can be smaller than 6 square feet. Another one says that a temporary sign should not exceed 12 square feet. One says they can't be more than 4 feet high. The other one says 6 feet high. But there's also other things like it can't be on a fence, or it can't be within 10 feet of a property line. One says that the sign can't be up for more than 90 days and must be down within 7 days of the event, which would be the election. Another one says that there's no limit to how long it can be there. So,
Mr. Hermes, just 1105 deals with non-residential zones,
okay,
and the confusing grid, which has allegedly been the simplification by Z21, is for residential.
yeah,
But I agree it's confusing,
right, and
they are different,
yeah,
so
but we do also get signs that get put in commercial properties as well.
100% agree.
Right. So
100% agree.
I'm trying to address it all, and I think it would be good if we could keep it consistent between the two. I don't think there's any reason necessarily to have a difference in the size and heights and time frames from residential to commercial. But we also can't restrict it. We can't say that it's geared specifically toward election signs either, correct?
No, that's absolutely right. So we have to be neutral. We have to be content neutral. The only thing that is in our zone as it relates to the election cycle is under the residential. Now, here's what is odd, is commercial, I think you could put a sign up forever as long as the 90 days, right? So theoretically, if you think through that, you could put a sign up You could take it down for a day and then put it back up on that on the next day, and probably restart the shot clock in 90 days is probably what code enforcement would say. With residential, as it relates to political signs, they have to be removed within 24 hours of the election cycle, but there is no limit to the 90 days. So I think in the residential world, you probably could have a campaign sign up 10 months out of the year, probably. But I don't know why you, I mean, here's the problem with that language, is it says the sign has to be removed within 24 hours of the election. So let's take the primary general as a situation. Okay, well, the primary now has just gone into another general, so I guess theoretically you have to take it down for a day and then put it back up. I don't know, right? There is a lot of ambiguity there. I think from an enforcement perspective, the biggest issue that the city has is it is virtually impossible to enforce these things without committing some other violation. Okay? So as an example, there are height and width requirements, but how do you measure that without trespassing on somebody's property? Right? Like that's, like I don't think we want to send somebody with measuring sticks measuring signs. So I think that's a practical limitation. I think Mr. Hermes has also brought up the other very practical issue that if you cite somebody, you know, they then have, under even the most aggressive of argument, 7 days to request an appeal, and then you probably have 30 days to hear that appeal. So even under the tightest timeline is 37 days before you can find somebody, under the tightest of timelines. And then that fine is probably only going to be a $50 or $100 fine. So if I want to put up a 500-foot banner in my front yard, it might be worth it to me for that possibility of a $100 fine. So I think what happens in most jurisdictions, and it's the wrong answer, but I think it's what happens, is most cities just flat out don't enforce the sign ordinances on private property. They will enforce in the right-of-ways. I mean, I think that's just generally what happens, is there's just, let's turn the other way for sign enforcement, especially during campaign season, because it gets crazy.
And that's pretty close to what we've done for the last few years, I would say, as well.
I think this year we did send letters. For those of you all that ran for office, maybe you know, I think we did send notice of violations. I don't know if any of those people appealed. I don't know what happened with that process. I was not privy to that, but I do think we sent notice of violation.
Does the candidate get the violation? Or
It goes the property owner.
Right.
Which again brings up its own issue, because now you're expecting a property owner, and what if it's a rental property, right? What if the tenant says, hey, you can put that John Smith sign in my yard? Who would know whether it's the right size or not?
Right.
But our avenue is to cite the property owner. But I don't see how we could change the text to go after a, you know, whether it's the candidate or whether it's a Pepsi sign in front of a gas station. I mean, if you go through this city, and that's always been my position, and I know I've probably frustrated people in this room. I've been very clear with staff that if we're going to start enforcing this, by God, we need to probably hire some more officers and enforce it, because the commercial people are violating this as much as the residential are. And what you don't want to do is be in a target-rich environment, right? You don't want to say that, okay, we're going to enforce it during political season, because that might be a free speech issue if we're not aggressively targeting, you know, a gas station, because they might have 7 signs selling cigarettes, beer, donuts, whatever. I mean, I'm serious. If you go up and down Dixie Highway with this zoning code, like you wouldn't make it down the street without finding almost a lot of property owners with issues. So that's why I've struggled with the enforcement side. I mean, I'll just be honest with you. Put the angst on me, because we can't unilaterally target election speech that we're going to selectively enforce our ordinance, but then not select, you know, a 2-for-1 donut deal at a gas station. So I think it's a problem. I want a donut.
Well, you know, some of the ideas I would think, you know, right off the bat, do we increase the square footage? Do we leave it the same? Do we increase the number of signs you're allowed to have? Do we keep it the same? You know, personally, I don't think I would mind if the signs were allowed to be bigger, so long as we put some other restrictions on there, like it can't obstruct sight distance for cars or vehicles. Yeah, but then I guess we start getting into a nuisance issue with neighbors. One other thing could be maybe it's a total square footage. Sure, you can have a 4x8 sign, but that's you're allowed 32 square feet.
I think we had a candidate in a local election that took that interpretation.
Right. So there's other ideas.
And I don't think it was an inaccurate interpretation. I mean, I think when you look at our current ordinance, and it says you're allowed 4 signs of 12 square feet, just from a philosophical perspective, that's 48 square feet a sign. What's wrong with a 12 by 4 sign, philosophically? How is it different from 4 detached signs versus 1 big sign?
Yeah. So open to ideas. Yeah, please.
So I guess I'm not really sure what direction you want to go with this. Are you just wanting to get rid of all the regulations? Because if we're saying that we're not going to enforce them, why have any of them? Because basically what I've heard tonight is it's all unenforceable.
I wouldn't say it's all unenforceable. I would say that it's challenging to enforce clearly free speech election signs on private property. I think there is a distinction.
Well,
I think we have a right to enforce, and I think that's probably why when they did the Z21 and they did this, they did separate commercial and residential, because I think there's a little different standard there.
But I've heard I've heard several people say, we can't measure them, so why have any regulations about the size? Because we can't measure them. And I guess we can regulate because we can count the signs on the property. So we could regulate the number, but we can't regulate the size because we can't measure, or we could regulate it, we can't enforce it. And I thought I heard you say that we can't make a distinction between election and non-election signs.
I agree with that. We have to be consistent.
Right, I understand. But what I'm saying is, what's the point of us debating or deciding any rules if we cannot enforce the size rules? If all we can really enforce is the number of days that they're up and the number of signs in a yard, and whether it's commercial or residential, then that's really the only things that we can. I agree that everything in the current ordinance is extremely confusing. It's very confusing. But if all we're going to enforce is the number of signs and the number of days, then that's all we should be making changes to.
Let me clarify a little bit. I think you can tell from the road without measuring certain sizes and scopes, right? So I think whether it's a 3x4 sign or a 4x3 sign or a 5x4 sign, that might not pass the visual, but if it's 20 feet by 30 feet, you probably wouldn't have to measure it. So I do think there is some reasonableness that there would be some signs that are clearly outside the scope of the size. I'm just saying if we're within, that just becomes a problem. Because just driving down the road, I think it's really hard to determine whether that's a 3x4 sign or a 4x5 sign or a 2x3 sign. I'll be honest with you, unless you have a sign that you can't, it's hard to eyeball. I sort of agree with you, but I think that's why we've never addressed this issue, and we talk about it every election cycle, because I just think the idea of just getting rid of all of these sign regulations for size is I think we'd at least want some input probably from PDS on that, because that would be pretty extreme.
I would definitely like to see what other cities' ordinances say.
I'm going to say they all look exactly like this or very similar to it.
And are yet none not enforced?
I'm telling you, I don't know of a city that aggressively enforces campaign signs. Outside of the right-of-way. Yeah, they clean up the right-of-ways, but I really don't know of a city that aggressively enforces campaign signs. I really don't. I mean, I think it's just one of those things that, I don't know, it's sort of like how many people get pulled over doing 30 and a 25? Probably nobody.
Well, this goes back to quite a few years ago, but there were some people who, I guess the state cited them or something for not putting the name on the bottom by the candidate.
Yeah, it'd be a different issue. Yeah,
Is that the state enforcing that?
That would be
And
a-
somebody has to report you, right?
That's right. So that would be a campaign finance issue, which the city would have nothing
I
to do
just
with.
felt sorry for people that got caught like that because
Right.
when I got my signs the first year when I ran, the gentleman who sold me the signs said, these are the sizes you can have. And he said, you have to put paid by candidate on the bottom. So thank God he knew what he was doing because I would have never known and I would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
So
I think from a size perspective, I think the county is less restrictive. I think a lot of cities around us are a little less restrictive. I think our size, and I mean, Mr. Doan probably knows as well as anyone, but I think our sizes are on the smaller side of what's allowed. And I think what happens, a lot of these countywide candidates or statewide candidates, they just have no clue. They're not paying attention to all the local sign laws. They're just not. Whether they should or shouldn't is a different issue.
bother me. I don't care what size they are. I'm sticking with what I've got, but I'm just saying if somebody else wants to have a giant sign, I could care less. So, you know, that's just my opinion. It causes a lot of friction among some people. Some people just go ballistic over these signs, and I'm like, who cares? What's the difference, you know?
I do think the right-of-way is a different issue. And that's also a safety issue, frankly. I think it's easier to argue that the removal in the right-of-way.
If you put them on the right-of-way, doesn't somebody take them? Yes, I was going to say they do. Or if you put it in a different city. I had a gentleman who took one of my signs, and again, this goes way back to when I first started running, and he lived in Edgewood, and he put it on Turkeyfoot Road. I had no clue, but my sign disappeared. And I have a feeling that, you know, somebody, county or city of Edgewood, somebody probably just took it down.
So our sign ordinances are a part of the zoning code and a part of the text, so whatever we would want to do would go through the normal text amendment process. And I mean, I don't want to be like the naysayer saying we can't do anything. I'm just saying that this is a sticky wicket. So we'd be open to any suggestions, change dimension, size, number. It's just, unless it's really obvious, it's going to be an enforcement issue. What do we want to do?
Well, I'm not hearing a whole lot of other input. So, I mean, I'm not real eager to jump in there and try to rewrite that ordinance when we would be like the only people around here with that. So, I would be open to discussing it more, future caucus meetings, but at this time, I'll table that idea.
I will say, Tyson, it might be worth it if the city itself is being just hammered, because, I mean, I know this can be used as a political tool against people too, you know, saying if you don't like a certain candidate, then you just complain and it taxes the city's resources. I mean, that might be a way to look at it, as trying to limit that, because I know that's a big thing. Just a thought. I'll help you look at it if you want to do that.
I know Mrs. Reckers also expressed interest in being a part of the discussion as well.
I mean, what we can do is we can discuss this at the next caucus meeting, and I can go ahead, it wouldn't take much time, and we can kind of go through city by city in Kenton County where they're at with sign restrictions and who is varied from the standard Z21. So I can have that ready in a month, if that would be helpful, with just size and number.
Okay, so we'll add it on the caucus agenda meeting for July.
Okay, number 5, Stevenson Road Reconstruction Project Resolution. Mr. Gatlin?
Yeah, this will be on at the general meeting in 2 weeks. It is pretty much a housekeeping measure. It relates to 236 Stevenson Road. That required local participation. I'm seeing more and more of this now with roads in the state, and we would have to pledge an amount up to $350,000 for our local participation as it relates to the reconstruction there on Stevenson Road. So again, it's just a resolution, a little beyond in 2 weeks.
Do we know what budget year that might likely hit? No? I wasn't sure if they were, once they get to, that they're going to hit us in this coming fiscal year with land acquisition, or if that's actually going to wait till construction.
No, so the $350,000 would be, we owe that, if you look at the agreement, we would owe that actually at the conclusion of the project.
Okay.
Yeah, at the completion. And again, I'm seeing this more and more in different cities, the local participation required.
Ms. Jasper Lucas?
So would we potentially, I mean, obviously if we owe it at the end, we would know at the beginning of that budget year. So we'd be able to budget for it. Okay. I was just thinking, are they expecting us to just put that in our budget every year?
Let me rephrase that. I was wrong. So it is when the project is let to construction. So when they bid it out, we will owe the $350,000.
So will we or won't we know before we do the budget that year? It sounds like in theory it could be whenever. I'm just wondering, are they expecting us to put that in the budget every year?
So we would know because we would have to do design first, then right-of-way acquisition, then we go to construction. So there are multiple years, multiple levels of this that we would know it's coming.
So I just received a text from the expert, Emmy Randall, on this issue. And she says it's probably 3 years out or more. And that we will have
From the
plenty
beginning?
From probably tonight, 3 years out or more, that we would have to worry about budgeting
Got
for
it,
this.
okay.
And that we would have plenty of opportunity for it and know when it's coming. Thank you, Ms. Randall.
All right, Mr. Gatlin, you're up again.
Another bad fill-in. So next is we are going to be, Duke approached the city for some additional easements. You can see the plat where these 2 easements are. We granted the temporary easements at the last meeting. These permanent easements are on Erlanger Road and Turfway Road, and they are, again, for Duke Energy for the construction of underground lines. I believe these are going to be underground lines. They are going to allow us, if we wanted to put walking trails over them, different use, but we have to grant them an easement. So the city has to sell them an easement, and that has been negotiated at $150,000 per acre, which is 50% higher than what Duke originally offered, which would bring a total receipt to the city of $138,090 to grant these permanent easements to Duke. It's one of those we don't have a lot of choices on. We can just negotiate the price once they kind of want it. And if you look at where this property is, it really has minimal impact to the future development use of the city. But we would be receiving $138,000 from Duke for the just under 1 acre. It's about 9/10 of an acre. That'll be also on in 2 weeks. Does anyone have any questions on that?
All right. Number 7, Farmers Market Update. Councilman Doe.
Thank you, Mayor. So I've been working on looking at building a farmers market structure here in the city. The intent of the project would be to put an application together and ask the Kentucky Agricultural Development Board for funding. Under the project guidelines for farmers markets, Cities are eligible for up to $250,000, or a qualifying entity is eligible for up to $250,000 in matching funds for construction of a farmer's market structure. So the hope would be to build one here in Erlanger. One of the issues that you're going to run into in constructing a farmer's market, and I've done about 9 of these around the state, is that farmers are hesitant to move or to leave their market. They think that the second that they leave, they're just going to lose all business. No one's going to find them again. So when looking at this project, it's become apparent that we're going to, if we want to build a structure, it's going to need to be done at Erlanger Baptist Church, where the market currently exists. I've engaged the church to see if they would have any interest in constructing something on their property, and they're interested. They have committed to allowing us to build a structure on the large parking lot. It would be, I guess, on the northern end. It needs to be repaved. It's old. It's surrounded by the 2 grass lots and the children's play area. So if you know where I'm talking about. And it would be a great, perfect location to build a farmer's market structure. The issue comes, if we were to move forward with that, what is council's willingness to use taxpayer funds to construct a building on the church's property? Some people in the city may take issue with that. We would have agreements in place. We would have a lease in place that would allow the farmer's market and the city to use the structure for appropriate events. But before we go too far down the rabbit hole of spending a lot of city resources on putting things out to bid and looking at what it's going to cost us, I just wanted to find out where everybody kind of stood on that single issue, and if that was a non-starter, what we needed to do.
So we would be leasing the parking lot, essentially. I mean, if it was for $1, we would still have to have a lease agreement between, it's not like but if for some reason the church decided to not renew our lease, I guess I'm thinking railroad property, same concept. If the church decides next year, we don't want you anymore, we need the parking lot, what would be the outcome? I mean, what would happen to the structure at that point? Yeah. Is it a structure that can be picked up and moved somewhere? Is it a permanent structure? I don't know, because a farmer's market's obviously not a traditional building like what we have on railroad property. So that would be my question is this a structure that we could then pick up and move to a different location in the future?
No. So in having done this from the state side, right, the goal of the Agricultural Development Board is to create sustainable long-term markets for farmers. So anytime a project like this came forward where the landowner wasn't the applicant would have to be the farmer's market, and then the landowner, somebody different. They always required at a state level that you have a significant lease, and it's always for $1, right? A long-term lease, and that would be the same intent here. Before we move forward with any lease, we would want to make sure that we're going to secure that for a long term. And so, no, I mean, if you put, $500,000 into a structure, I mean, it's going to be permanent. And the Agricultural Development Board understands that these markets are typically used 16 times a year, and so they're absolutely okay with that being a multi-use structure that you can host other events at. So it doubles, and to some extent, as a farmer's market, but also a community, center as well.
It could be in our lease that the church could use it for events as well, or anybody could use it. I mean, in theory.
The church could use it for trunk or treat, and the city could use it for a cookout, an employee appreciation cookout. Yeah, those are all things that we've discussed, the church is on board with, we're on board with, well, when I say we're, that's me and the 3 other people that have had the conversations. But, yeah. So, yes.
How many of these other farmers markets across the state are on a faith-based nonprofit organization's land?
I don't know. I know that typically they're on the extension agencies, so typically it's government property.
Right.
I know that one is on the city of Somerset's property, and I mean I don't know of one off the top of my head, but there's 119 farmers markets maybe more around the state. So, and obviously we have one on faith-based land now.
Yeah. That's probably but it's not ours, right? We're not funding it.
Right. Well, I think we do put some city resources into it. I mean, we keep reports and I think we have a staff member committed to making sure that we're, arranging that and sending out newsletters and things.
I mean, I think my initial reaction is I'm not liking the idea, but I just don't know enough about, now I have to go do more research.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I don't know if somebody else had their hand up or not. Were you finished, Erin? Okay. Would it be able to, would that space allow for the same number of vendors that are there now?
We would hope more. Yeah, and kind of the Cadillac model of farmers markets would allow the market to extend year-round. The one in Somerset, the most recent one that I know of that the Ag Development Board funded has, kind of like Drake's has those garage doors where it can go up and down and you can use it. It's a seasonal building. Vicki?
Well, that kind of answered my question. I was going to ask if it was something that could be used during the winter season, because you said something about a community center that, would it be heated or air conditioned?
That's at the will of how much money do you want to spend, I mean, you could build the nicest one in the world, but I don't know that is what everybody wants to do. So.
And we would be paying the lease, correct?
I would probably only negotiate for $1 lease for whatever term. I mean, I wouldn't, if we're going to build that building, I wouldn't imagine that the church should expect much money out of us.
Okay.
Another question for you.
Yep.
So as far as a value back to the entire city, I mean, what does that really mean for that $250,000 or more investment?
That's a good question. So I think that in terms of a monetary value, right, we're not getting sales tax off of anything sold there. Some of the things that you can do with an expanded farmers market, there's a Double Dollars program that Community Farm Alliance administers. So you would allow now increased access to locally grown produce, meat, that you can take your SNAP and WIC benefits and essentially double your dollars there at the market. You're also going to help us, we've just rezoned this entire street, and I think that having a nice structure there that's going to attract people in will kind of help us move in that ROC zone towards some additional construction and additional improvement in that district. So it's difficult to put a monetary number to what the benefit is, but I think there's certain benefits there in terms of advancing a cause there on that street.
So, Steve, from a legal perspective, I have absolutely no concern with spending taxpayer dollars to put it on somebody else's property so long as we are secured on that property, right, with a lease, and it's very clear that it's a long-term commitment and things along those lines, and I think it satisfies the public use. Where I may have a concern is who's going to control the use of that property. Is it going to be Erlanger Baptist Church, or is it going to be the city of Erlanger? Because that's where I think we could run a little issues if Erlanger Baptist Church wants to control that use.
Yeah, so we've had some discussions about that, and prior to my conversations with you on it, we had kind of intended that the church would be responsible for scheduling. We would write into the lease, here's a notice provision, 30-day notice if the city wants to reserve it, or 60-day, whatever that may be. That's kind of how we looked at it, but I don't have a hard set or a hard fast rule on how we would do that. I think the church is open to that as well. It's just who wants to dedicate the time and the staff to do all that.
I kind of feel like we should almost treat it like, I'm not going to say it needs to be one of our parks, but we have a process now for reserving parks. Why not just make this almost an extension of that process that we already have in place? Because to me, if we're the ones leasing it, we should really be in control of who's using, or the reservation process for it. And I also feel like, I don't know if people would be hesitant to call the church to reserve it, But like I said, we already have a process for reserving a park. If somebody was to use it as for a birthday party, I don't know if that's one of the uses that we want to allow or not, but I'm just using that as an example of somebody calls and, reserves Cahill Commons for a birthday party. They call and reserve this for, the exact same way, that we already have a process in place. I would rather see it that way, especially because we're leasing it. I just feel like it should be our responsibility, and I think that might, if people have an issue with it being on church property, that somewhat separates it even more, because it truly is our responsibility. So that's just my 2 cents on that part of it.
I agree. I think we have to treat this facility the same way that we would any other facility in the city, and I think the policies and procedures for that farmers market has to be the same policies and procedures that we would have in the city. I think if we treat them differently, I think that's when we could run into potential issues. I mean, I just, and I understand the church might have issues with that. I get that. But I just think in my seat as city attorney, I would have a hard time subjecting, we as a city are subject to a lot more scrutiny in the courts with everything than any private entity is, right? But then when you add the flavor of a faith-based organization, it's no different than if it was a Catholic church, or, I mean, it's not the denomination that would matter to me as the attorney. It's just as long as they would be comfortable with whatever policies and procedures we have on the city. I just don't know how we could be different. Now, I think we could be I don't think we would run any afoul of things such as I saw on the sheet, they don't want anything on Wednesday nights, they don't want anything during church on Sundays. I think that's fine, but I just think if they're controlling, again, it's a content issue, just like we talked about with signs, right? If they're controlling who, what, when, and where, other than the timing of church, I just think we could run into issues as a city. I think there's concern there.
Mr. Doan, I wanted to thank you for all the time and hard work you've been putting on this project. I'm in favor of it. It's just I think it's more for discussion and keep the meeting. I guess you're having one next month as well, and invite the public and other council members and anybody else for more discussion, because I think it's something we should think about moving forward with, because a lot of cities do it, and if we even kept Thursday and possibly added a Saturday, I think that could be great for everybody, the farmers as well, and the people on WIC. And you said they'll double what they can buy, and why wouldn't they want to take advantage of that? So I think we ought to all try to figure out something and move forward if it's possible on this. That's a great idea.
Anything else? All right, that's it.
Okay, do I entertain a motion that we adjourn? Ms. Kyle? Ms. Nicely? Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Have a good evening.